Hi, it's Zeke with the Eastside Church of Christ, and thanks for joining us for the Eastside Bible Reading Program. For the week of March 29th through April 24th, 2020, we'll be reading in places in Deuteronomy, in Joshua, in Luke, and the Psalms. As we continue in Deuteronomy, Moses kept reminding the people of their obligations to God. When they crossed into the Promised Land, they were to stand on opposite hills, Ebal and Gerizim, and there would be half the people on Ebal and half the people on Mount Gerizim. From Ebal, they would shout curses that would come upon them for their disobedience. From Gerizim, they would shout the blessings that they would receive for holding fast to God's law. Now, certainly God knew the direction that they would take, and perhaps that's why he spent more time on the curses than the blessings. As Moses continued, he reiterated that their future was based on a simple choice: life and prosperity on one hand, death and adversity on the other. And the key for making the right choice would be based on, as he put it in Deuteronomy 30, verses 15 through 20, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and holding fast to him. Finally, Deuteronomy closes with Moses' song, his view of the Promised Land, and then his death. He's given a fitting eulogy as a very special man in Israel, and thus ends a profound period in the life of ancient Israel. Joshua's book opens with exhortations to Joshua to be courageous. There's a scouting expedition into Jericho and Canaan, and then Israel's crossing over the miraculously dry Jordan riverbed and the decisive conquest of Jericho. God told the Israelites that he was giving them the city, but they still had to follow his directions in order to take it. That's an appropriate lesson still for us today. Grace is a gift to us from God, but we still have direction from God in how we appropriate that grace. There's a lot in the chapters that we read in Joshua that are highly symbolic of the trust that Israel was to show in God, such as the men's circumcision after being in the wilderness all those years, the piling up of stones to commemorate God's help on their behalf. But unfortunately, that trust, at least for some, would be short-lived. One man, Achan, his selfishness caused Israel's defeat at the next city, Ai. And after dealing with Achan according to God's direction, Israel was again victorious at Ai. Our reading in Luke, chapters 12 through 16, show Jesus teaching on various aspects of discipleship. He performed acts of healing on the Sabbath, which not only humiliated his opponents, but of course caused them to hate him even more. His well-known parable, several parables on lost things in Luke chapter 15, those parables resonate with us. After all, who hasn't been lost and insecure at some point? And who, after receiving the gift of being found and forgiven, doesn't love the story of the prodigal son? Again, how many of us have been there? In Luke 16, Jesus tells the story of a rich man and a poor man who die and end up in very different places. And of course, it's not hard to learn a lot of valuable lessons from that story. Finally, in Psalms, Psalm 13 is a plea to God for help, while Psalm 14 scolds those who believe there is no God. But yet both Psalms end with affirmations of God's goodness to those who trust him. Psalm 143 is another prayer for deliverance. While the psalmist acknowledges his discouragement, he realizes his dependence on God to be lifted from it. And again, that's another valuable lesson for us today. And one of the many reasons why people, especially in times of distress, head right to the Psalms for not only messages of affirmation and encouragement, but a realization that throughout time, man is basically always the same. We get into fits of trouble, and we need God. And most importantly, he's there for us. Thanks for joining us in this week's Eastside Bible reading. May God